The park bench. The autumn leaves fell like copper rain across Riverside Park, carpeting the ground in shades of amber and rust. Margaret Hayes walked the familiar path, her designer heels clicking against the pavement with each measured step. The blue blazer she wore cost more than most people earned in a month, but she barely noticed the envious glances from passers-by anymore. Wealth had become her armor, her identity, her refuge from memories she'd tried desperately to bury. She came to this park every Friday afternoon, seeking something she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the way the old maple trees reminded her of simpler times. Or maybe it was the foolish hope that walking these paths might somehow undo the past. The park was quiet today, with only a few joggers and dog walkers scattered across the sprawling grounds. Margaret's assistant had cleared her schedule for the afternoon, as she always did on Fridays. The corporate meetings could wait. The investor calls could wait. Everything could wait for these few precious hours when she allowed herself to simply breathe. She rounded a familiar bend in the path, her mind elsewhere, when she saw them. The man sat on a weathered wooden bench, his elbows resting on his knees in a posture she recognized instantly. He wore a yellow plaid shirt, rolled up at the sleeves, and faded jeans that had seen better days. His hair was slightly longer than she remembered, touched with gray at the temples. But it was unmistakably him. David. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Her feet stopped moving, though she hadn't consciously told them to. Time seemed to fold in on itself, collapsing 8 years into a single, terrible moment. Standing beside the bench were two little girls, identical in every way. They couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Both wore pink dresses and white tights, their blonde hair pulled back in matching ponytails. They were talking to David, their small hands gesturing animatedly, though Margaret was too far away to hear their words. The twins. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her chest, where her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The leather portfolio she'd been carrying slipped from her other hand, landing on the leaf-covered path with a soft thud. She should leave. She should turn around right now and walk away before he saw her. Before those children saw her. Before everything she'd built came crashing down around her feet. But she couldn't move. David was laughing now, reaching out to ruffle one of the girl's hair. The child dodged away with a delighted squeal, and her sister joined in the game. They circled the bench, giggling, while David pretended to try to catch them. It was such a simple scene, so ordinary, yet it shattered something deep inside Margaret's chest. This was the life she'd walked away from. These were the children she'd abandoned when they were barely 6 months old. Margaret had been 26 when the twins were born, drowning in postpartum depression she hadn't understood and couldn't control. David had worked 2 jobs to support them, coming home exhausted every night to crying babies and a wife who could barely get out of bed. She'd felt trapped, suffocated, terrified of the responsibility that came with 2 tiny lives depending on her. So she'd left. She'd taken nothing but her car and her ambition, driving across 3 states to start over. She'd thrown herself into her career with the desperation of someone running from ghosts. And it had worked, in a way. Within 5 years, she'd built a tech company from nothing. Within 8, she was worth $30 million. But the money hadn't filled the hollow space inside her. It had only made the walls around it higher, stronger, more impenetrable. Now, watching David with their daughters, Margaret felt those walls begin to crack. "Daddy, can we get ice cream?" one of the twins asked, her voice finally carrying across the distance. "We'll see, Emma," David replied, his voice warm and patient. "Let's finish our walk first." "But Lily wants ice cream too," the other twin chimed in. "Right, Lily." The girls had names now. Emma and Lily. Margaret's vision blurred with tears she hadn't cried in years. David stood up from the bench, taking each girl by the hand. They started walking down the path, heading directly toward where Margaret stood frozen. She had maybe 30 seconds before they reached her. 30 seconds to decide whether to face the life she'd destroyed or run away again. Her legs trembled, her throat closed up. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the autumn air and cease to exist. But then Emma looked up and saw her standing there. The little girl's eyes, the same shade of blue as Margaret's own, went wide with curiosity. "Daddy, that lady looks sad," Emma said, tugging on David's hand. David looked up. His eyes met Margaret's. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Margaret watched the emotions play across his face. Recognition, shock, anger, and something else she couldn't quite identify. The muscle in his jaw tightened, and his grip on the girl's hands seemed to tighten too, protective. "It's okay," he said quietly to the twins, though he never took his eyes off Margaret. "Go play by that tree over there. Stay where I can see you." The girls hesitated, sensing the tension, but eventually skipped off toward a massive oak tree nearby. They began collecting acorns, occasionally glancing back at their father. David walked slowly toward Margaret. She forced herself to stand still, to not run, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. "Hello, Margaret," he said when he reached her. His voice was neutral, carefully controlled. "David." Her own voice came out as barely a whisper. I didn't know you'd moved back here." 3 years ago," he said. "After my mother passed." The girls needed stability, family. The unspoken accusation hung in the air between them, "Things you never gave us." "They're beautiful," Margaret said, the words catching in her throat. "Emma and Lily." David's expression softened slightly at the sound of their names. They're everything to me." Margaret felt tears spill down her cheeks, not caring that they ruined her expensive makeup. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "David, I'm so sorry. I was sick, I was scared, and I made the most terrible mistake of my life." David was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughters play beneath the oak tree. "I was angry for a long time," he finally said. "Furious, but I had to let it go. For them, they deserved a father who was present, not one consumed by bitterness." "You've done an amazing job," Margaret said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "You're the parent they deserved. The parent I couldn't be." David looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his eyes. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "I've done therapy," Margaret continued, the words tumbling out now. "I understand what happened to me now. The depression, the fear, it doesn't excuse what I did, but I understand it. And I've spent every day since trying to become someone who could have stayed. Someone who could have fought through it." "Have you?" David asked quietly. Margaret looked past him at Emma and Lily, laughing as they tossed acorns at each other. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'd like to try. If you'd let me, not as their mother, I know I lost that. Right, but maybe, someday, as someone who cares about them. Someone who could be in their lives, if they wanted that." David followed her gaze to the twins. "It's not about what I want," he said. "It's about what's best for them. I know, and I won't let anyone hurt them again. Not even you. I know that too." The autumn wind picked up, sending leaves swirling around their feet like tiny tornadoes. In the distance, Emma called out for her father to watch her climb the oak tree. "I'll think about it," David said finally. "It won't be quick, and it won't be easy. But maybe enough time has passed." Margaret nodded, not trusting herself to speak. David turned to walk back to his daughters, then paused. "Margaret, I'm glad you got help. I hope you've found some peace." "I'm working on it," she said softly. She watched as he rejoined Emma and Lily, lifting them both in a bear hug that made them shriek with delight. As they walked away down the path, Emma looked back over her father's shoulder and waved. Without thinking, Margaret waved back. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't redemption, but standing there in the falling autumn leaves, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 long years. It was hope, and for now, that was enough.